Well, thank you, Lauren, again for joining us today. I'm excited for our tour of Spirit Works Distillery in Sebastopol, California, and I'm going to hand it over to you to show us around.
Yeah, of course. Welcome back. We're happy to get the chance to kind of show off our space. It's always been a big part of the company ethos here to have a level of transparency in what we do, and so kind of letting people onto the production floor is a big part of that, and explaining our process and really kind of taking on that role of educator has always been something that on a personal level I really enjoy, but also I think that Spirit Works really excels at. So yeah, I'll do my best to try and keep this camera steady. I'm not gonna lie, my arm is already kind of tired, but I'll do my best. And yeah, feel free to interrupt me with questions, because like once I get started,
sure,
it can just like keep coming out of my mouth. So
actually, really quickly on that note, so normally if the distillery is open, you guys do offer tours. Is that correct?
That is correct. Yes.
Okay.
Currently things are different, but we do offer tours on Friday, Saturday, and Sunday, twice a day. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Great.
And this will be similar, but
abbreviated
for sure.
It's always better in person, for sure.
Yeah. And I'd say that it's typically an hour long and includes a tasting and all that kind of stuff, for sure.
Awesome. Perfect.
Yeah. Cool.
All right. Well, let's see the floor.
Yeah, let's see the floor. So behind me is our still, and once we get around back to this stage of our actual production process, I'll show you it in more detail. But it's typically the eye-catching component of what we do here. So it's always a nice starting place. Spirit Works Distillery is a grain-to-glass facility, so we make all of our own base spirit and then use that in order to make the products subsequently after that. So like we make our own vodka that then becomes gin, and so on and so forth. So the way that I like to kind of typically present what that process entails is kind of walk through what happens once the raw materials get here and follow it all the way into a finished product. So I'm just going to kind of walk us through the space to our grain wall, which actually is currently devoid of grain.
Oh, okay.
It's in the back room right now because we're using this as a staging area for shipping. Yeah, currently. But we get in 2,000 pound or 1 ton totes of grain in at a time. And the facility has been designed in order to process that volume in one go. So that is our batch size. So 2,000 pounds of grain is our batch size. The tanks that we have can hold a little bit more than that, but it's more about like hours in a day. So the goal was to kind of make each step about a day's worth of work. Okay. So
actually, racking, quick question.
Yeah, already a question. Yes.
1 tote of grain would likely produce how many bottles of, let's say, vodka?
Of vodka, you're looking at around 120 cases.
Okay. And that's a 12-pack or a 6-pack?
6 packs.
Okay.
Yeah. If all of the spirits that we produce are in 6 packs. Yeah.
Got it.
Which is usually different, for wine industry. So
yeah,
we'll bring.
Oh, go ahead. No. It was not important. I was going to say kind of your bulk beverage is usually, in that 12-pack. I feel like craft beverages are usually more in a 6-pack, anyways, side note.
Makes sense. So we'll bring that grain, just that raw wheat berries is typically what it is for the base spirit. And then we also do hand blended mash bills for the different whiskeys that we make. So we'll get like 50-pound bags of different malts and rye and corn and things like that. And we'll blend those in a center flow, which kind of acts as a funnel into this funnel here, which is the hopper. So the bag will be up top. There's kind of a little sock that'll fall down and control the flow of that grain coming into the hopper. And then it'll come down into the main part of the mill here. And this is a hammer mill versus a roller mill. So a roller mill you'd find more commonly at a brewery, and it just kind of like cracks the grain open, but preserves a lot of the flavor and integrity of that to carry through to the finished product. For distilling, concerns for fermentation are largely influenced by like what your overall yield of alcohol will be. And so in order to facilitate that and to get higher yields of alcohol, we pulverize the grain with a hammer mill. I'm going to actually open it up at this point. Woo, second. Oh. So you can see inside, these are the little hammers. So the grain comes, the grain comes down through here and then out through this hole here and then into this area. And then these little hammers force it against the grate. And then the flour falls down into the boot. And there's a little flexible corkscrew auger in this plastic tubing that lifts up that flour up, and deposits it into this tank, which is our mash tun. Okay. So you've added water, and we're simultaneously adding flour in there as well. There are steam injectors. This is like so awkward for me, but I'm trying my best.
You're doing great. You're doing great.
Thanks. Steam injectors so that we can add heat to that situation. And the reason why you're doing that is you kind of want to activate the enzymes that are present. We do enzyme additions, but the enzymes that we're using are the same ones that you would find in malt, which are saccharification enzymes that kind of help break down the starch stores that are in the grain into more simple sugars, so that when we add yeast, it can take up those and more easily process those simple sugars into ethanol during that fermentation process.
And so is that like a traditional like steam kettle, so to speak?
No, I would say the system is similar, but not anything like brewing beer.
Okay.
I mean, it's similar because the basic process is the same, but like this is a much less complicated piece of equipment. We're just doing on grain fermentation, so there's no separation out of solids. It's all kind of in the same situation, and you just let it go. For our fermentation is only about 3 days long. So it's very fast. We use a really aggressive distiller's yeast for the base spirit, and we use a different but still distiller's yeast for the whiskey as well. So fermentation can take anywhere from 3 days to a full week, depending on what the raw material is and a variety of other factors. So yeah, it kind of, you want to make sure that you're getting the most out of it, but you also have to think about how long that takes and how much more efficient you could be if you did another batch at the same time.
Got it.
So, yeah, so flour, water, your two different saccharification enzymes, and we also add a liquefaction enzyme, which just makes sure that things don't clump or get sticky. There are certain grains that are more prone to doing that than others. Rye is a pretty classic one that tends to get gummier. And so we add that liquefaction enzyme in there just to make sure that it's easy for us to move around the space, and cleaning, which I mentioned in our conversation before, how important that part of the process is.
I was looking at that grinder and I was like, oh, that would not be fun.
Honestly, that's one of the I love cleaning the mill because you get those streaks of flour and like just you're just like totally white with flour at the end of it. I like it, but I also like getting dirty, which is another part of it. You have to like cleaning and you have to like to get dirty.
Yeah.
But yeah, so you have flour, water, our alpha and beta amylase enzymes, liquefaction enzyme, and then we add our yeast nutrient and our yeast, and we control for pH and temperature. And the goal is to kind of create the perfect environment for that yeast to then take those sugars and create as much ethanol as it possibly can off of that kind of starting sugar. So we do 2,000 pounds of grain, about 500 gallons of water, and ends up with around 800 to 900 gallons of liquid. This is pretty liquidy. And then fermentation, again, 3 days to a week, and we achieve anywhere from 10 to 13% alcohol during that time. So fairly high yields. Once fermentation is complete, we'll set up a network of pumps to pump from the mash tun over to the pot, which is just on the opposite it currently. And you can see this little sight glass here is how we're hooking up the fermentation tanks or the mash tun and to pump over that mash. So it'll take 3 pump overs from one fermentation tank and or the mash tun in order to empty it. So there's like around 800 gallons in there, and this still can't hold quite that much. So we'll do 3 runs in order to empty it fully, and those runs are called stripping runs, which are the most basic distillations that we perform, or alembic distillations. So an alembic distillation means that vapor is coming off the helmet here and traveling, bypassing the 2 columns and going straight to the condenser, which is the stainless steel column. So that stainless steel column has water running through it, so it's forcing that vapor to phase change back into a liquid for collection purposes. And a stripping run is fairly quick. The goal is really just to kind of remove as much of the remove the solids, remove as much water as possible, and really just try to concentrate that alcohol that you created during fermentation. So you're getting that 10 to 13% alcohol, and then after a stripping run, you're about 40% alcohol, or at about 80 proof. So it does a significant jump in just that first initial run, and you'll end up with about 1/3 of what you started out with. So you started out with those 800 gallons, and you'll end up with about 1/3 of that on the back end. And those the product that you're getting is called low wines. It's like very rough alcohol. It's not something particularly pleasant that you'd want to
refined.
It's not refined. Doesn't have it's not been finished yet. It's not been polished yet. It's an uncut gem, I would say. And so those low wines will then get loaded back into the pot, and then depending on what the product is, it will run through the system in a separate way. So for example, if we're going to be making vodka, those low wines will go back into the pot, and then we'll run through this taller column, which is a 21 plate column, in order to achieve 95% alcohol. So legally, vodka or base spirit has to come off the still at above 95% in order to be designated as that type of spirit. And that allows us to get up to such a high percentage of alcohol. So each one of those windows acts as a mini distillation. So as vapor is rising, it'll hit a bubble cap that's inside there and actually condense on that bubble cap, roll down the sides, and then fill a little tray that's underneath it. And the liquid that fills that tray is at a higher concentration than the liquid that you started out with.
Wow.
And so that liquid will then eventually boil and turn into vapor and continue to work its way up the top. So that liquid will collect, but then it will continue to move its way. And so each step of that ladder, of that column, continues to increase in alcohol by volume percentage until it reaches the very top and comes off of the top and down through the condenser for collection that way.
Wow, really cool. I've actually never had that process described, so it's really interesting to learn how it physically works.
Yeah.
And then, so if, like, let's say you weren't making a base spirit, you can also then like cap them, right, to get your flavor profile that you're looking for.
So not on this system.
No,
this is not set up to do that type of distillation. This column, that tall column, the only purpose of it is to make base spirit. So the only purpose is to get up to 95% alcohol. It's something that we're like that column is what makes Spirit Works, because that's the column that allows us to be a grain to glass facility. And do our own fermentation, and then make our own 190 proof or 95% alcohol in-house. And we only run it through one time, which kind of gives it that house flavor. So that texture, that sweetness, it carries over from that raw material. And it's pretty impressive that much flavor and texture can come through, considering that 95% of it is ethanol. And flavorless and colorless. So it's pretty incredible that much flavor you can taste it coming out the back end. Yeah, for sure. So there's 3 parts to every distillation. There's the heads, the hearts, and the tails. We do everything via sensory perception. So really the only thing that you want is the hearts, which is the ethanol. Heads are things that are like more volatile in nature. So they actually evaporate faster than ethanol will. And they come through the system at the very beginning. And you can taste them and smell them. Those are the things that taste and smell like Sharpie. I kind of liken them to like artichoke almost. They're very toxic. That's kind of one of those things, like a drop will do an insta shutdown on your liver. So for the most part, it's via nosing, and it's very strong. You get a hold of that pretty quickly. And the goal is to remove every trace of that from your finished product if you're looking to make something super high quality. And that's one of the reasons why people do, a significant amount of filtering and extra distillations and things like that, is to try and get something as neutral, as clean as they possibly can. But we make pretty heavy cuts at the beginning and the end to make sure that there's nothing that comes through the system at all. So it also come out of the parrot here. You can see the liquid coming out. This is gin. And it's not vodka, but it's gin. So it'll come through this parrot, and then there's a manifold here that you can control where you're collecting into. So for the heads, we're always collecting into the heads tank here. And then once we can no longer smell or taste those kind of more volatile alcohols and things like that, we'll switch our collection method and start collecting into something like this tank over here. And that's how you separate out those different parts of the distillation, is like a physical separation of the two.
Sure. And is there anything that can be done with the heads and the tails? Like, can those be repurposed in any form?
Yeah, they're solvents, so they can be like cleaning agents. We use them for like nail polish remover, whiteboard cleaner, ant killer.
Nice, ant killer.
Yeah, it's also like a sanitation. So like you wouldn't want to rub those things on your skin, but like it's a pretty good sanitation component. Sterilization. Yeah.
Cool.
Anyway, so you can do things like that with it for sure. Yeah, but it's relatively a small amount. I mean, you think about volume wise, it's not like half the distillation is that much, because it's going to be very concentrated into a small volume.
Got it.
Yeah. So then you're collecting your hearts after you've removed the heads, and then tails is when it gets hot enough in the pot that water molecules will start to come through, and they're strong enough that they can pull over larger molecule chains and things that could potentially bring over flavor. So with a product like whiskey, you're looking to include some portion of those tails. But for something like vodka, first of all, it can't go below that 95% alcohol. So if water starts coming over, it'll start to dilute the percentage of alcohol that's coming off of your still, and it will no longer be vodka. Or a base spirit or something like that. So you just got to kind of stop the distillation at that point and have it be done.
Got it.
Yeah. So if we're making gin, we'll take that base spirit at 95% alcohol. We'll add a good amount of water to it in order to have a little bit more control of the distillation. If you put 95% alcohol into the pot and then heat it up, it would just all instantly evaporate at the same point, which is 78 degrees Celsius. And you don't have any control over how things are coming through your system. So you're adding that water to elongate the distillation and to have a little bit more precision in what you're doing. So we'll take that base spirit, add water to it, add botanicals as well, and then do another alembic distillation, which means, again, bypassing either of the two columns, and you're just looking to pull over flavor. So as that alcohol comes through the system, it's pulling out the essential oils from the botanicals themselves. And we do a two-way extraction method, one in solution, so there's botanicals in the liquid, and then also vapor extraction, which means that there are botanicals in the helmet.
Got it. I was just going to ask if there was like a maceration period for your gin.
So that's one of the best parts about gin, is that everyone's method and recipe and process is so different. So a lot of different ways to infuse flavor. Some are only maceration. Some are digestion, which means that you're just heating the botanicals, but you're not actually getting hot enough that you're causing vapor to occur and collecting. And then there's distillation. There's like a variety of different methods for infusion, something like a Carter head, which is more like a vapor extraction method, all of that kind of stuff. So we don't do extenuated maceration for our recipe, but I've definitely done it before.
Got it. Yeah, it's really interesting, like how many different kind of variations that there are for distillation. And, you know, I know that there's several different types of stills, and so it's just really an interesting, and it's great that like everybody really does have a different approach to it, which makes it unique and
totally. I mean, that's one of the reasons why I feel like there is no real concern of someone taking your recipe and replicating it, is because for at least on the craft spirits level, like no one has the same equipment, no one has the same palate, you know what I mean?
Right.
All of that kind of stuff. It would be very difficult.
Even just like the simplicity of like, you're probably not getting your grains from the same place. And, you know,
totally.
I mean,
Absolutely.
that plays a big factor in your base. So
for sure. Yeah. So
cool.
It's that is one of the things that I love about gin, is just like so diverse in process specifically. But it's a really fun endeavor to kind of try and chase down the rabbit hole for sure.
Nice.
So once we make that gin, we can either put it into bottle, or we can put it into a barrel, or we can put it over sloes to make slow gin. And I'll talk more about slow gin during our tasting.
Awesome.
Essentially, you're putting high proof alcohol over fruit in order to extract color and flavor.
Got it.
So those are kind of the gin lineups. If we're making whiskey, we go back to those low wines, right? And the low wines get put into the pot, and then they get run through the shorter column here. So the goal with whiskey is to never get above 160 proof. So you have to be collecting below that. That's part of its legal definition. So vodka has to be above 95%. Whiskey has to be below 160 proof or 80% alcohol.
Got it.
Yes. I'm like, halves.
Yeah, math.
But it's good. I still got it, I think.
Yeah. For sure.
After all this craziness. So, and the point of that is because, you know, we're talking about how with whiskey, you're wanting flavor, you're wanting a lot of that grain to kind of make its way over. And then eventually those flavors and those molecules that kind of come through the distillation process, because it's not fully rectified out, will change chemically over time through oxidation, interaction with the wood. And that's what will create the really wonderful complexity of whiskey as a whole. So, yeah.
Nice. And then you guys typically barrel and age for 4 years. What is your...
So everything coming out of the distillery now is 4 years. When we started, we did, we released at 2 years. We were making straight whiskey. So straight whiskey means that it's a minimum of 2 years aged. And we were really proud of being able to put down for those 2 years, because that's a long time in craft distillery years. Like that's a long time to have to wait on product. And we only use 53-gallon barrels. So we can head back there really quick. You can take a look at the barrel room. Hopefully the lights will go on as we go in there, and we don't just like go
stand in the dark.
Yeah, stand deep into the dark, so you can see how dark it is.
Oh yeah.
Ooh,
oh, there you go.
Yeah. All right. So this is our barrel room here. Yeah. There's about 300 or so barrels in here.
Wow.
And but yeah, now we're only releasing out 4 years, and then we're still saving some behind for later releases. So at 4 years, you no longer have to put an age statement on your label. So that's kind of one of the reasons why 4 years is a big deal, is because you no longer have to say how long it's been in barrel. And so that's kind of like a sign that someone's left it in longer than that.
Sure. And then do you guys, I'm not sure if this is the correct term, but like, do you rack those? Like, do you change their locations throughout those 4 years? Like, do you find, or do they just, if you're living on top, they're going to stay living on top?
Yeah, I mean, we don't shift, although that is definitely a practice in some rick houses, is to move barrels around. The purpose for that is the exact opposite of what you're hoping for with wine, right? With wine, you want humidity and temperature controlled because you really want to be able to either, control or minimize the amount of movement of that alcohol kind of in and out of the wood itself. With whiskey, it's the exact opposite. You want to facilitate that as much as you possibly can. So you're looking for big changes in temperature. You're wanting it to get really hot and really cold. You're wanting it to get really humid and really dry, because humidity and temperature are huge factors as to whether or not the liquid inside that barrel will expand or contract.
Right.
So if it expands, it moves out into the wood, and it contracts, it'll pull back out. And so you're hoping for a couple of things to happen during that process. One is you're looking for certain undesirable flavors that were in your distillate to bond out with the carbon that is inside your barrel. So a typical whiskey barrel is like a full char 4 barrel. So it's just like a fireball on the inside, as opposed to like a toast, which is what you'd more commonly find in wine. And so that'll bond out some of the things that you're looking to remove from your distillate over time. And then also you're wanting that liquid to kind of extract flavor from the wood itself. So tannins, particularly vanillin, which I'm assuming you can guess what it tastes like. But those kind of like vanilla, sweet flavors, a lot of that comes from the wood. I'd say most people would say that about 70% of a whiskey's flavor comes from the barrel itself. So your barrel program and how you stage and how you store it is important to your finished product, and it typically tends to be part of the construction of your process method as well. Like, you have to be thoughtful about your aging component of it if you want to have a product that the product that you were hoping to make coming out the other end, for sure.
Right.
Yeah. So we do wheat whiskey, rye whiskey. Like I said, we just released our bourbon. We'll be tasting all of those during our tasting. Then we also have some fun stuff in here. We have like a single malt and several different single malts and some triticale, some spelt. I even have some light whiskey in here, which is a completely different distillation method.
I was gonna say, I'm not sure I'm familiar with that.
Yeah, it's not super common because it's distilled to a higher percentage of alcohol than typical whiskey does, and so it has I guess some people would say relatively lighter in flavor and viscosity and things like that. But I've always been a big believer in kind of finesse and nuance, and those are definitely things that can be present with a light whiskey. Oftentimes, light whiskey is used as like a blending component, so people will age it alongside other types of whiskey and then kind of use it as a blender for other things, for sure.
Yes, interesting.
Yeah, it is interesting. But yeah, here's an example of what the inside of a barrel looks like. Can you see that? Yeah. So this is that.
I was just gonna ask that. So that's the char you guys go with, and that's considered a char 4.
This is a char 4, but every cooperage is different. So that was an Independent Stave Company barrel. So those I would say are like industry standard. And they are out of Lebanon, Kentucky, and they have another facility in Missouri. I mean, they have facilities everywhere because they make all different types of barrels. But it was really cool. I had the opportunity to go to the cooperage itself, and it was just incredible what they are able to achieve. The craftsmanship and the speed at which they're able to do it.
Oh yeah.
Mind-boggling, for sure.
And is the wood all new American oak, or is it?
This is all new American oak. Okay. Yeah, for sure. Again, I would say pretty standard for American whiskey would be to use new American oak, for sure. Right. And we use that for all of our whiskeys. We haven't really experimented with oak profiles or anything like that. And we do pretty much yeah, everything new except for the light whiskey, I think. Yeah.
Project for another time.
Yeah, exactly. For another time.
Yeah.
But we switched cooperages recently. So this is ISC, so that'd be Independent Stave Company, and we switched cooperages to over here. You can see, I don't know, that one's for Charleroi Cooperage. They're out of Cloverdale.
Oh, cool.
So they're just like a lot closer, and they've been really fun to work with. They, usually historically have made a lot of wine barrels, although they do use the American oak for wine barrels as well. And so they were looking to kind of get into spirits, and we have a really great relationship with them. So that's been really fun.
Yeah,
and
that's
so,
great.
Our barrels now, not this one obviously, but this one has both a char and a toast in it.
Oh, interesting.
So yeah, kind of switched it up a little bit.
Cool. Very exciting. Well, I'm looking forward to tasting.
We're going to be doing whiskeys,
which I'm excited about.
Good.
So we're going to start with the straight whiskey.
That's straight wheat whiskey. They're all straight. Yeah, they're all straight whiskeys. Yeah.
Awesome. Well, I'm excited. So tell me a little bit about this particular whiskey.
Absolutely. So as you might imagine, based off of its name, it is a wheat whiskey, which means that it has wheat in it. And this just happens to be 100% wheat. So that means that the mash bill, the starting raw materials that we are going to be milling and mashing and fermenting and all that kind of stuff is only wheat. We're not going to be adding any rye. We're not going to be adding any malted barley in there or any barley or anything like that. It's just wheat. And what's kind of fun about having 100% as of a specific grain in a mash bill is you get to kind of experience the essence of what that grain has to offer. And so by having this, you'll be able to kind of taste the wheat in any other whiskey that has it as a component of its mash bill. So for me, wheat has like a very kind of stone fruit, a very floral component to it. I often think of like apple blossoms and kind of apricots. Those are like my two go-tos for wheat. It also tends to have kind of a sweetness to it, but not the same kind of thickness or fusely component as bourbon does. So it's sweet, it's light. It can be like almost on the refreshing side for whiskeys in particular.
It has a really nice nose, and I get that apricot. It's really refreshing is a really interesting way to describe it, but it is that, at least again to the nose, it does have a really refreshing quality to it.
Yeah, kind of like a tart sweetness to it. Yeah, I really, really like the wheat whiskey. I call it like the easy drinking whiskey because it's just so easy to drink.
Yeah.
And just very, very gentle, very soft, a hint of sweetness, but like, again, enough kind of diversity of flavor in there to make it interesting and complex as well.
Yeah, it's really nice. It doesn't like blow up your palate. It's not overly hot or spicy. It has just a little, what I kind of call like that wood component to it, like the sides of your tongue feel.
The tannins.
But it's not overpowering where it then wipes out the rest of the flavors, which is really nice.
Yeah. It's a fun one for sure. And it's pretty rare. Almost no one makes 100% wheat whiskey. Although wheat is a grain that is often used in whiskey, it's rarely just on its own. And so it's kind of fun to be able, like I said, to kind of taste the true soul, the true spirit of wheat, and then be able to recognize that flavor profile in subsequent whiskeys that you're tasting as well. Also just like very enjoyable, just easy.
It kind of has an almond finish to it. Like, at least that's what I'm kind of getting.
Like I'm getting like almost like an orgeat.
Yeah, exactly.
Are you familiar with that? Yeah.
I really enjoy
like that
orgeat.
to me. Yeah, me too. It's like,
now I want to drink all of that.
I think I mentioned before that I'm really bad at making cocktails, but I am so impressed with bartenders and like tiki cocktails. They're like a mysterious wonder to me. I have
They're
no
great.
frame of reference for how they come to be, but I'm always happy that they're there.
Well, and what I think is really interesting is orgeat actually is in quite a few tiki cocktails that you wouldn't think would be a flavor component for them just because it seems not tropical, but it always to me like really rounds out a beverage for variety. Like I really, my ties are a little hit or miss for me sometimes, but I think when you add orgeat to them, they kind of like open up to another playing field.
Yeah, it's like a counterbalance to all the acid.
Exactly.
That's typically in there.
Yeah, I really
love it.
Yeah. So now we're going to try, now this is the newest addition, correct?
Yes.
To the lineup at Spirit Works?
Yes, that's
I'm
correct.
really excited about. So 4-grain straight bourbon.
Yes. So this is a blend of 2 different mash bills. So the wheated bourbon and the rye malt bourbon. So the wheated bourbon, oh, go ahead.
Oh, no, I was just going to say, and this was aged for 4 years, right?
All of these are aged for 4 years.
All of them are. Got it.
Yeah. All of these are a minimum of 4 years. So some of them are like 4 years, 6 months. Some of them are getting closer to 5 years, but all of them are over 4 years at this point.
Got it.
Yeah.
Okay.
So there's the wheated bourbon, which has a much sweeter profile. Since that wheat has that kind of gentle sweetness to it, it really helps kind of fortify the sweetness that comes off the corn. And then we use a malted barley in there that kind of accentuates that as well. So very, very sweet. And then we do a rye malt bourbon, which is 60% corn, 30% raw rye, and then 10% rye malt. And so it's very, very rye forward. So a lot of spice, a little bit of bitterness, and having those two come together, they really kind of create a really wonderful harmony between the two of them. So, oh yeah, definitely recognizable as bourbon on the nose. You get that really lovely kind of fullness from the corn. I always love bourbon because it has so much weight to it.
It's a good way to describe it. Yeah, corn does add such a different nose.
Totally. It's first thing I get is kind of like this really round sweetness to it, like a really, really kind of heavy sweet. And then that rye picks up right in that middle and kind of cuts right through it. It's like chicory. It almost has like a bitter chocolate component and a really, really nice long finish. So like you get this heavy sweetness and then kind of like a little palate cleanser right in the middle, and that kind of lets the flavors kind of play out on your palate for a longer period of time for sure. But bourbon I'd say is one of the things that we get asked for most often if we make it. Because it is one of the more common styles of American whiskey, and obviously people really love bourbon, and there's some amazing bourbon out there. So it's nice to finally have something to offer people who ask for it for sure. And it's something I'm really, really super happy with and proud. I think everyone did a really nice job with it.
Yeah, it's really nice. It does. It has a really like you said, forward sweet nose, but you do get that rye kind of cutting through it right there at the end of it. Mouthfeel, it does hold a little bit more weight in your mouth than the straight wheat. And it definitely, the rye does kick in there in the middle, foreground. You can definitely feel it. It almost, kind of turns you into like a salivating monster a little bit.
Astringent. Yeah, I often get astringent qualities with rye for sure.
But it's really nice. And what's, you kind of get some additional heat, but it also dissipates really quickly. It doesn't linger and like kill the flavor at all, which is nice.
Yeah, I'm so pleased with it. I'd say, I mean, I probably shouldn't say my favorite style of whiskey is rye. I mean, I love Japanese whiskeys, but I'd say probably rye is my favorite style of whiskey. But I couldn't have been happier with the way that this bourbon turned out. You know, you're always nervous. You wait, you know, so many years hoping that what you did is going to come out as something that people will enjoy, that you will enjoy.
Yeah.
And so I'm like relieved that it turned out as well as it did. Not that I was like thinking it wouldn't, but you never know, because until you taste it, like you never know. So I couldn't be happier with how it turned out.
No, it's really nice. It's really, really nice. Very enjoyable.
Thank you.
So rye is one of your favorites, huh?
Yes. I like really bitter. I like really sour, and I just like really strong flavors. Again, you know, when I go get a cocktail, sometimes I'll just ask for like lime juice and spirit. And I know that's not really a cocktail, but like sometimes that's just what I want to drink.
I mean, I feel like that's like the 2 ingredients that make up a gimlet. So yeah, it's a cocktail.
I mean, there's usually some simple sugar or like some sort of sweetener in there, but yes, for sure. I just really like those kind of like almost those salivatory flavors that kind of cause that sensation. I really like those, and rye does that for me too. So I like that kind of bitter. I like it a little rough around the edges, I guess.
Yeah. I initially was not a big rye fan, and I've slowly but surely become a fan of it. I think because the first rye whiskey I ever tried, it felt like I was eating bread a little bit, and it was just not a pleasant experience. So I definitely prefer.
I love eating bread, so.
I mean, I love bread, don't get me wrong, but I guess I wasn't ready for it. Like I didn't understand rye well enough to like know what I was putting in my glass, and I drank it a little bit more like a whiskey, like a blended whiskey, and so it just didn't go down so well.
Yeah.
But so needless to say, I prefer a softer rye, but I am coming around to them more and more.
Sure. Everyone has their own preferences, which is part of the fun, right? You know what I mean? Being able to find something that really resonates with you is, I'd say, the best part about drinking, you know, spirits, beer, wine, whatever, is kind of like finding your own path and your own palette within that experience, and like feeling ownership over the things that you like.
Yeah.
Which is kind of fun, for
Definitely.
sure.
Well, on that note, we are going to move to the straight rye whiskey.
So this is a high rye. It's 70% rye, 30% malted barley. So there's definitely a strong backbone of rye in there, but some of that aggressive flavor is really softened by the presence of that malted barley. So it gives it a little bit more structure. It gives it a little bit of sweetness, kind of balancing out some of those very spicy, very aggressive tones coming from the rye itself. But I'm a big
Is the reason it's called a high rye was because of the percentage of rye?
That's correct.
Okay. I was like, it doesn't have to do with like altitude and like where it's grown or anything like that.
No. It just means it has a higher concentration than what a typical rye has to be. So rye whiskey, it has to be minimum 51%. So anything around 70% would be considered like a high rye. And part of the reason for that is because rye is a very forward flavor. Like you can't hide anything when there's a lot of rye in there. And so that's part of the reason why it's like its own offshoot of rye whiskey that way. So yeah, so I get a lot of like coffee in here, dark chocolate. There's like a rich sweetness to it, like almost dulce de leche, you know what I mean? Like cooked down condensed milk in there. Because it has like almost like a burnt caramely type of flavor to it.
It almost
And
kind of
and
reminds
also,
me of like you know, if you ever like not toasted orange peel, but like if you burn an orange peel.
totally. Yeah. I can see that for sure. Yeah, I get a little bit of coffee in there and all kinds of fun things. I also like it because it gives a texture like to my mouth. It tastes like I don't want to say it. It tastes like stubble almost, like it kind of
Oh,
like rough a little bit.
I get
Like
what you're saying.
yeah, and I like that. I like that flavor. So
Smelling it is making my mouth salivate. So I can only imagine like the mouth feel around it.
totally. Ooh.
It does. It has a really syrup is the wrong word for mouthfeel, but it just moves a little slower almost in your mouth. It feels like than the
Sure.
other ones.
Yeah, it has like a thickness to it.
Yeah.
But then you really get this spice from the
Mhm.
rye as well. It's kind of like a tingling sensation, right?
Yep. It's delicious. That's
Probably
really,
why I like rye
really
so much.
nice. I think it's really well
Thank
rounded
you.
and it doesn't like kick you in the face.
No, I'd say in general, our kind of approach towards flavor development is much more about that kind of subtlety and depth instead of like hyper aggressive flavors. And I
Right.
mean, I like spirits that have that really intense, flavor profile for sure. But this is more of the style. The house style here is kind of that softness, that really, really kind of thoughtful and gentle, and takes you a little bit on a journey rather than just like it's like a really intense power chord.
Right.
It's kind of like more of a soft melody.
Right. It's a great way to describe it. Well, yeah, because all of them are really enjoyable like on their own, which usually lends itself to a more of like a sipping experience versus like a cocktail drinking experience, which is nice. Obviously not all brands are able to do that.
Yeah, and I'd say that, when you're crafting the type of spirits that you're wanting to make, people are thinking about what they want people to do with it. I mean, a lot of people drink spirits in cocktails. So if you're making a spirit to go into a cocktail, it makes a lot of sense. For us here, the goal has always been to create something that people can enjoy on its own, but also would hold up to being mixed. And so for sure, you kind of have to, that has to be part of that product development process, is like, what is going to happen to this? You know what I mean? Like, you can't just make something and then not have any plan for it. So you kind of want to be able to predict, or at least give some people some pointers, hopefully, about what you see it going to in the future, for sure.
Yeah, these are all really delicious. I'm not sure which one my favorite is. That's a hard one.
That's okay. I don't know. It's so hard. I enjoy all of them for different reasons.
Yeah.
I'd say right now the bourbon is probably my favorite, but it's hard to know whether that's just because it's the new and shiny thing.
Right.
I think they're all, so tasty. I just love rye, so it's hard for me to. That's why I was like surprised that I liked the bourbon as much as I love it. It's because I was like, nothing can replace the rye in my heart.
That's hilarious.
Yeah. But
yeah, no, I'm like sitting here, I'm like, what do I want to make with each one of these, and like test them out and try them. And I really want to make like just a good old fashioned. And then also I think, but I'm not sure which one to use for it. And then I also think, I think the wheat whiskey would be really, really good in a whiskey sour.
Yeah, for sure. I'd say for me, the favorite cocktail with the rye, if not just drinking it straight, is a Manhattan. Because it just is, I love those like spirit forward cocktails, and I love vermouth, obviously, because I like botanicals and like that sort of flavor profile and things like that. So yeah.
Nice.
Also, I can't get enough of Luxardo cherries. So
I do love,
anytime there's an
Luxardo
opportunity to put a Luxardo cherry in something, even if it's not supposed to go in there, I'm like, yeah, it needs one of those.
Just a little garnish.
For sure. Yeah, exactly. For sure.
And so lastly, we're going to try the slow gin.
Yes.
Which I opened this on Friday and made some cocktails with it during happy hour, and it was delicious. And it was also the first time I had ever had slow gin. And so I'm now like super hooked and a fan.
Yay. Yeah, I'd say
so delicious.
The slow gin is, it's a special spirit. I think it's one of the things that's really helped Spirit Works distinguish itself from other craft distilleries. It's really nice to have one thing that that you do a little bit differently than everybody else does, because then you can kind of point to that. And then if people like it, you can say, well, if you like that, then you should probably try some of the other stuff that we make. So it's really nice to be able to have something that people are really open to tasting, excited about tasting. Slow gin is a strange one, because there's definitely like a generational divide about people who are very familiar with it and people who have never heard of it before. And oftentimes the people who have heard of it, it's not like this type of slow gin where it's like made from fruit and all that kind of thing. It's kind of more of a processed version of it. And so
you were talking about how traditionally it's a bit sweeter.
Much sweeter. Yeah.
Right. And I think it's like a really nice, to me, I think it has a really nice sweet component to it without it being like medicinal, like cough syrup.
Yeah.
So it's hard for me to imagine it being sweeter, frankly.
Yeah. It is much sweeter. You can imagine it once you taste it.
Yeah.
And like, that's just a style. That's just like an approach towards that product. And like, again, we were talking about, you have to think about what the intention is of that spirit.
Right.
And we know that slow gin, at least in the United States, is most likely going to get mixed. It's less often going to be just drunk on its own, although there has been some movement towards like putting it on an Amaro cart or like a little after dinner a tipple or something like that. But most likely it's going to go into a cocktail. And so if you can make it more available, more easily integrated into recipes like that, I think it really has value to be to kind of approach it in that way. So it's just like a different end result, end game, And I love the flavor of slows, and sometimes that flavor can be masked by the sugar in slow gin. And so like really having an opportunity to kind of get that nose and that flavor of that pomegranate and like kind of strangely acidic, floral and all that kind of thing is really fun to be able to taste and smell that for sure.
So what exactly so it's a slow berry, correct?
It's a plum.
It's a plum.
But it's called a slow berry.
Okay.
Yeah, it is a plum. It's Prunus spinosa. It's mostly pit. There's like a very small layer of skin around it, and there's pretty much nothing you can do with slows except for put them into alcohol. So that's what happened to them. And there's like a very big kind of tradition and culture. So Timo's family has been making slow gin like in their house for forever, individually pricking each plum and sticking it in for years at a time to macerate and things like that. And so they wanted, Timo and Ashby wanted to recreate something on a commercial level that was of the same quality as what his family more traditionally would make. Yeah.
So you've gone through the gin making process that you just took us through. And so now it's come off the still. Would that be correct?
Yes.
And now you're going to macerate it with slow berries.
Yes. Oh, did we stuck?
No, it fixed itself.
There we go. Okay. That is correct. Yeah. So the gin will come off the still, and then we'll put that somewhat higher proof or still strength spirit over the plums in order to break down some of the structure, the cellular structure of the plums itself. So you have like a faster maceration period, and that's what pulls out the flavor and the color is the alcohol, which is essentially working as a solvent in order to extract the from it. And then after that maceration period, we'll drain off the liquid and collect that. And then we shovel the plums into a little bladder press and squeeze out all of the concentrated like gin and juice. Nice. And that's like even more intense flavor plum wise. And then filtration is a huge part of it. So you got to filter anytime you're using like whole fruit, there's a lot of filtration that has to happen in order to get something that doesn't like flocculate or fall out of solution or cause that kind of residue. And even though, you know, we're doing our best to try and do that, you know, sometimes it's inevitable. There's like a little bit in there, but we try so hard to get it as clean as we possibly can get it.
Well,
I just think
aesthetically beautiful.
No, thank you. Yeah, it's pretty.
It is. Yeah, it's a really, really pretty spirit.
Yeah, it's very bright. This sloe gin has a lot of brightness to it. I found that, you know, some of the other sloe gin offerings out there have a little bit more of that oxidation quality, which is also delicious. But I love how our sloe gin already has some of that kind of like punch to it that can kick through some of the sweetness for sure.
Well, and what I think is really fun is like, to me, it can be a year-round kind of enjoyed cocktail. I feel like you see a lot of seasonality with certain types of spirits, but sloe gin really has both of this like warm spice winter weather kind of quality to it, as well as like this beautiful floral direction that it could go. So it really does lend itself to be used in a variety of ways, like throughout the year, which I think is a lot of fun. You know, I feel like sometimes you crave your lighter spirits when it gets warmer, and you know, you usually tend to drink your darker spirits in the winter, but this is really delicious.
Yay, I'm glad.
I was, like I said, I was really like overly pleasantly surprised when I tasted it on Friday, and I was like, where's this been all my life?
There's a lot of complexity there, you know what I mean? There's a lot of flavor, and it's kind of nice because, again, sometimes with liqueurs in particular, the amount of sugar that's in there can dampen some of the flavor. And so it's nice to have something that has like a really, again, really bright, punchy flavor to it that helps with the balance of the sweetness for sure.
Yeah. I again learned something new. I had no idea that a sloe berry was actually a plum.
I know. Well, I mean, berry is what it is called. Yeah. But like, it's just like with juniper berries, they're not actually berries either. They're pine cones. So it's just like, it's just full of false berries.
Yeah, false berries. I like it. Yeah. It's hilarious. Well, awesome. Thank you so much for your time. It was a lot of fun to taste through these with you and get to know you a little bit better over the last couple of days while we've recorded this fun stuff. So I look forward to actually meeting you in person, hopefully in the near future.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, it's been a pleasure. And thank you so much. It's been really fun for me too. I always like talking about our stuff and getting excited with our spirits for sure.
Wow. You guys make great things. So excited to continue to see what else you guys create and release over the next years.
We'll do our best not to disappoint you.
Impossible. All right. Thank you. Well, have a great rest of your day. Thank you so much. And
yeah. Thank you so much. Stay healthy.
You as well. Bye.